My soul left my body the moment I saw the test. Positive. My hands trembled violently, and breathing became impossible. I was pregnant, but there had been no mating. No bond existed. No claim had been made. Just one night that remained a blur in my memory because alcohol had erased everything. And now this? My heart pounded so hard it felt like someone had placed a stone inside my chest. I collapsed onto the bathroom tiles, the test still clutched in my shaking hand, thinking only one thing. What do I do now? How do I tell anyone? The clinic nurse had looked at me strangely. An omega, unmarked, and pregnant? This was nothing short of a scandal waiting to explode. I thought maybe someone would understand. Maybe my friend. Maybe someone. But when I told my best friend, he laughed at me. His laughter cut deeper than any blade ever could. Charlie, are you insane? You didn't even mate with anyone and now you're pregnant? Whose is it? Some random stranger's? His words stabbed into my heart like daggers. I tried to explain, tried to make him understand, but he just kept laughing. And then he told everyone. Within a single day, the entire campus knew my secret. People taunted me in the hallways. Someone shouted when I stood by my locker, their voice dripping with contempt. The slurs burned into my mind. Questions about how many alphas I had been with echoed through the corridors. I tried to ignore them, grabbed my bag and walked away. But their voices haunted me. Social media became a nightmare. Anonymous accounts shared my photos with captions that destroyed what little dignity I had left. New messages arrived every day, each one more vicious than the last. Some told me to end my life. Others blamed me for ruining society's perception of omegas. I stopped sleeping at night. Food became impossible to swallow. Only one thought consumed my mind. Who was I? Had I really fallen this low? Because if society, my friends and complete strangers all said the same thing, maybe they were right. Maybe I truly was worthless. An omega who couldn't even protect his own honor. One night, sitting alone in my small apartment, memories started returning. The club. Dim lighting. 3 men. Their faces weren't clear in my memory, but their presence had been overwhelmingly strong. Sharp jawlines, dark suits, cold eyes that could probably take someone's life without hesitation. I had talked to them, maybe flirted a little. One of them had given me a drink with a strong smell. The other 2 had stood quietly nearby, tracking my every movement like predators watching prey. And then, nothing. Just a strange sense of comfort, warm body heat, and then waking up alone in a hotel room the next morning. How did all of this happen? I scrolled through social media searching for clues, but found nothing. I only had one thing, their scent. Cedar wood, gunpowder and something metallic, unique and terrifying. Like the scent of a dangerous alpha who plays with blood. The next morning, as I was about to leave for campus, someone knocked on my door. My heart stopped. Maybe it was my landlord demanding rent or someone else coming to mock me. But when I opened the door, 3 men stood before me. Same height, same sharp feature, same cold, unreadable expressions that didn't change even when looking at me. Triplets. And I knew instantly, these were them. They looked me up and down, scanning me like someone examining their property. The first one spoke, his voice low and dangerous. He knew my name. He said they had been looking for me. My throat went dry and I stood there frozen, weak, pregnant, and completely exposed before 3 dangerous alphas. My instinct screamed at me to slam the door shut, but before I could react, the second triplet raised his hand and stopped it effortlessly, as if it were a toy. His command was sharp as a blade when he told me not to. The third triplet walked inside as if he owned the place, and I backed up until my spine hit the wall. My hand automatically moved to my stomach, a protective instinct awakening inside me. I asked who they were and why they were disturbing me, but my voice lacked the confidence I desperately wanted. The first triplet closed the door and locked eyes with me, stating plainly that they were the fathers of my pup. My mind went blank. What? Fathers? Plural? They noticed my expression, and the second one explained in a flat tone that night 3 months ago at the club. Them, me. This wasn't a joke. This was reality. I stared at them, taking in their expensive suits, shiny heavy watches and commanding presence that made the room feel smaller and the air thinner. I asked what they wanted now, trying to sound brave but failing miserably. The third triplet, who hadn't spoken until then, finally spoke. His voice was the coldest. He told me I was coming with them tonight and to pack my things. I shook my head firmly. I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't know who they were, and honestly, I didn't care. I was handling my own life. They needed to leave. The three of them exchanged glances, and the first one smirked. It wasn't warm or friendly. It was predatory. Like an alpha smiling at his cornered omega, he used my full name and told me I had no choice. I was carrying their air, and I had been living in danger, mocked, bullied, and unprotected. That ended now. My chest tightened painfully. I told them I wasn't their property and neither was this pup. They needed to leave, or I would call the police. The second triplet pulled out his phone and twirled it in his hand like a toy. He told me to go ahead and call them, to see what happens when I tell the police that the Draven brothers came to my door. Draven. That name. I had heard it somewhere before. In the news. Underworld connections, mafia operations. Ruthless killers who eliminated anyone without a second thought. Oh God. I looked at them with horror clear in my eyes. They read me like an open book. The first one confirmed it. Yes. They were those Dravens. He introduced them as Cain, Nox, and Rhett. And I, the little Omega, had just become their top priority. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, legs trembling uncontrollably. This was real. Mafia alphas had gotten me pregnant. And now they had come to claim me. I whispered that I couldn't go with them. This was all wrong. I was just trying to survive. Cain, who seemed to be the eldest, knelt down in front of me. His eyes held something unexpected, softness beneath the steel. He told me they weren't here to hurt me, but they wouldn't let me suffer here either. I was theirs. That pup was theirs. And they took care of what belonged to them. My heart raced frantically. I asked what would happen if I refused. Rhett, the cold one, spoke without any hesitation whatsoever. Then they would take me anyway. And they did exactly that. I struggled with everything I had, but Nox lifted me easily as if I weighed nothing at all. I screamed at him to put me down, but no one listened. When we reached outside, a black SUV waited, and they placed me inside. Cain sat beside me and the door locked with a definitive click. I was trapped, pregnant, alone, and now traveling with three dangerous alphas who had already decided I belonged to them. I sat in their car as sunlight gradually faded while we drove out of the city. They hadn't given me time to pack properly, just said essentials only before dragging me out. I had managed to grab my diary, phone, and some clothes before they forced me to leave. My mind remained blurry about everything. Was I being kidnapped or rescued? Nox, the middle triplet, sat in the driver's seat. His presence felt calm yet terrifying at the same time. Cain sat close enough beside me that I could clearly feel his scent. And Red occupied the front passenger seat. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Finally, I broke it by asking where they were taking me. Nox looked at me through the rearview mirror when he answered with one word, home. I asked what he meant by their home. He clarified that it was ours now, mine too. Rhett spoke without turning around, his voice ice cold. I would stay with them in their estate under their protection, and I would have everything I needed. I said quietly that I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to live my own life. Cain grabbed my hand, his grip soft but firm, warm and unexpected. He said that life had been killing me slowly. They had seen the posts online, the videos, all the hatred. I had been alone, starving myself, and that was over now. My throat closed up completely. They had seen everything, all my tears, my weak moments, my late-night breakdowns when I thought no one was watching. I asked them why they even cared. My voice vulnerable and shaky. Nox finally spoke again, his tone firm and absolute, because that pup was theirs. And I was their Omega. I pulled my hand away sharply and told them I wasn't their Omega. They hadn't marked me. No bond existed between us. Cain leaned closer, his scent wrapping around me like a thick blanket. He whispered two words, not yet. My breath hitched involuntarily. Rhett added coldly and factually that bonding without consent wasn't their style. But I shouldn't mistake their patience for weakness. I belonged to them the moment I conceived. I said nothing in response. What could I possibly say? They were powerful, dangerous, and somehow protected. Nobody wanted to hurt me anymore, maybe for the first time in months. We arrived at a massive estate. The gates opened automatically, revealing a mansion that looked like something from movies. Black stone construction, tall windows, guards positioned everywhere with guns clearly visible on their hips. I barely whispered, asking if this was their home. Rhett nodded and added that it was one of them. A strange feeling rose inside me. Fear mixed with curiosity and something else I couldn't identify. Relief, perhaps. When I walked inside, the interior took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. Expensive art decorated the walls, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress designed to keep the world out. A staff member led me upstairs without making eye contact. The room they showed me was enormous. A king-size bed dominated the space, an attached bathroom with marble counters, a walk-in closet bigger than my entire apartment. But I just stood by the window, staring outside, noticing the high walls and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. I placed my hand on my stomach and asked myself if I was doing the right thing. Someone knocked on the door. Kane entered carrying a tray of food. He stated that I hadn't eaten all day. I told him I wasn't hungry. He called my bluff with a single word. He set the tray on the side table and approached me, close but not invading my space. He used my first name and told me they weren't my enemies. He knew this overwhelmed me completely. But I was safe now. He promised me that. I looked into his eyes, searching for deception, but found only intensity and honesty. For the first time in 3 months, I broke down crying. Kane pulled me into his arms carefully, as if I were fragile and might shatter. I rested my head against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat, finding unexpected comfort there. I whispered that I was exhausted beyond words. He acknowledged that he knew, his hand gently rubbing circles on my back. He told me to rest now, and we would talk tomorrow. He guided me to the bed carefully, pulled the blanket over me, and then quietly left the room. And for the first time in many days, I fell into a peaceful sleep. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. A note waited for me on the nightstand. Kane's handwriting was sharp and decisive, telling me breakfast was downstairs and not to skip it. I freshened up and made my way downstairs hesitantly. The dining room held all 3 brothers already seated, dressed in suits, looking every bit the dangerous businessmen they were. Knox noticed me first and gestured toward an empty chair with a simple command to sit. I lowered myself into the chair carefully. The table overflowed with options: pancakes, eggs, toast, fresh fruit, orange juice. But I only reached for the juice glass. Rhett noticed immediately and told me I needed protein. I insisted I was fine. Knox stated firmly that I wasn't, and they had a doctor's appointment scheduled for today, to ensure both the pup and I remained healthy. My heartbeat accelerated suddenly. A doctor? Everything was happening too quickly. I protested that I wasn't going to any doctor. Kane leaned back in his chair, remaining calm but utterly firm. Yes, I was going, and it wasn't negotiable. This marked the first time they had directly ordered me to do something, using that alpha authority in their voices. Honestly, it infuriated me. I told them they couldn't control me like some puppet they owned. Rhett's jaw tightened visibly. Knox set down his fork with deliberate slowness. Kane simply stared at me with those unreadable dark eyes. He finally spoke, his voice dropping lower. They weren't controlling me. They were protecting me, and there existed a significant difference between those two things. I muttered that it didn't feel different at all. Knox sighed heavily and explained that they understood this was all new and I didn't trust them yet. That was acceptable. But the pup needed medical attention. I needed medical attention. So either I came willingly, or they would carry me there. My choice entirely. Frustration, anger, and fear battled inside me. But deep down, buried beneath all those emotions, I knew they were right about this. I stood up abruptly and told them fine, I would go, but they needed to remember one crucial thing. I wasn't their property to command. Rhett stood as well, towering over me with his intimidating height. His voice came out softer than expected when he said nobody had claimed I was. The doctor's clinic occupied a private building in an upscale area. No public waiting room filled with judgmental stares. No whispers behind hands. Dr. Hale, a kind beta woman with warm eyes, examined me gently and professionally. She smiled while telling us that everything looked good. The pup was healthy and developing normally. I was approximately 14 weeks along now. 14 weeks meant almost 4 months. She turned the ultrasound screen toward us and I saw it, a tiny flickering heartbeat. Tears came automatically streaming down my face without permission. Kane stood beside me and squeezed my hand. Knox and Rhett watched the screen too, their normally hard expressions softening considerably. This was their pup as well, their bloodline, their future. Dr. Hale asked if we wanted to know the gender. I glanced at all three of them questioningly. Kane nodded his permission. She announced it was a boy. Knox's lips curved into a slight smile. Rhett's eyes softened completely for the first time since I had met him. And I felt completely overwhelmed. My son, our son, Dr. Hale continued, saying he was strong with an excellent heartbeat, but she expressed concern about my weight and told me I needed to eat properly and consistently. Back at the estate after the appointment, Kane summoned me to his study after lunch. He said we needed to talk about important matters. Nervousness flooded through me instantly. Did they want to bond with me now? Force something I wasn't ready for? He told me to sit, and I carefully lowered myself into the leather chair across from his massive desk. He remained standing, his expression serious and contemplative. He used my name and acknowledged that they knew my previous life had been hell. They knew people had hurt me deeply and repeatedly, but I needed to understand something fundamental. They weren't like those people. They weren't here to use me and discard me when convenient. I stayed silent, simply listening and trying to process his words. He continued, saying they wanted to bond with me properly and completely, but only when I felt ready. No force, no pressure, no manipulation. My chest tightened with conflicting emotions. I asked what would happen if I never felt ready for that. Knox's voice came from the doorway where he had been standing silently. He said then they would wait however long it took. Rhett walked in and added that while they could wait for the bond, the pup needed to be claimed officially because society would demand legitimacy for protection purposes. My mind spun trying to follow their meaning. I asked them to clarify what they meant exactly. Kane spoke carefully, choosing each word with precision. They wanted to marry me legally and publicly, making me theirs in every way that mattered to both their world and the outside world. My world tilted sideways again. Marriage? This represented an even bigger step than I had imagined. Kane nodded when he saw my shocked expression. Yes, marriage. It would protect me from their enemies. It would protect the pup from anyone who might use him against them. And it would send a clear message. Anyone who messed with me would answer directly to the Dravens. My emotions mixed together into an indecipherable knot. One side offered safety and security. The other side whispered warnings about control and loss of freedom. I asked what would happen if I refused their proposal. Rhett spoke with his characteristic bluntness. Then they would still protect me with everything they had, but the bond would remain incomplete, and enemies would perceive that as a weakness they could exploit. I asked about these enemies they kept mentioning. Confusion clear in my voice. Knox stepped forward into the room fully. He explained that they weren't just businessmen running legitimate operations. People hated them, rival families, betrayers, corrupt cops who wanted them behind bars. If those enemies discovered I was unbonded and unmarked, they would come after me specifically to hurt the Draven brothers. I would become a target painted on my back. My heart sank hearing this harsh reality. I wasn't just thinking about myself anymore. I had to consider the pup growing inside me and what kind of life awaited him. I asked how much time I had to make this monumental decision. Kane's voice softened noticeably. As much as I needed, but he encouraged me to think quickly because keeping me safe was their primary concern and priority. The following days passed surprisingly peacefully considering the circumstances. They gave me space without forcing anything. The library contained books I read late at night when sleep wouldn't come. A beautiful garden offered a place to walk and think. The staff treated me respectfully and nobody judged me for my situation. And the three alphas remained attentive without becoming suffocating. Kane talked with me daily about small things that helped me relax. Favorite movies, food preferences, dreams I wanted to accomplish someday. Knox took me on walks around the estate grounds, and those quiet moments felt calming to my anxious mind. Rhett remained the most distant of the three, but he was also the most observant. When I caught him in the kitchen late one night making chamomile tea without being asked, I realized he cared too, just silently and in his own way. Maybe he cared the most deeply of all three. One evening while I sat in the garden watching the sunset paint the sky, Knox approached and asked permission to sit with me. I nodded my agreement. We sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes. Knox finally spoke, saying he knew this world scared me terribly, but I was stronger than I gave myself credit for being. I admitted honestly that I didn't feel strong at all. I felt like I was drowning and nobody could save me from going under. He said gently that I wasn't drowning in the least. I was learning how to swim in deeper waters, and they were right there beside me, ready to catch me if I started to sink. His words healed something broken inside me. Maybe these men weren't as terrible as I had initially feared, but trust required time and I had been betrayed too many times before. That night in my room, someone knocked on my door. Rhett stood there looking uncertain. This marked the first time he had approached me without a specific reason. He asked if he could come inside. Surprise colored my response when I agreed. He entered awkwardly, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He admitted he wasn't skilled with words or emotional conversations, but he wanted me to know something important. They were serious about this. About me. About the pup. This wasn't some game they were playing or a mafia power move. My throat tightened painfully. I asked why they cared so much when they barely knew me. We had shared one night that I couldn't even remember clearly. He looked straight into my eyes with startling intensity and honesty. The moment they had touched me that night, something fundamental changed inside all three of them. They felt it physically, the bond forming. Incomplete. Yes. But real and strong and undeniable. My breath stopped completely. They had felt the bond forming, physically sensed it. I asked with hurt bleeding into my voice why they hadn't found me sooner if this bond was so important. He said quietly, and I could hear guilt layered in his words, that they had tried desperately. I had disappeared completely, changed my phone number, moved to a new apartment. They had searched for 2 solid months before finally locating me. Every single day they looked, every contact they had searched. They thought they had lost me forever and would never find their Omega. Was this the truth? Had they actually tried that hard to find me? My perspective suddenly shifted, and I began to realize that maybe these men were genuinely different from everyone else who had hurt me. The next day, I made my decision after careful consideration of every factor. I called all three of them to my room for a private conversation. My hands shook slightly when I told them I had thought everything through carefully. I would marry them as they requested. But I had one absolute condition that was non-negotiable. Kane raised an eyebrow questioningly. I stated my terms clearly. No forced bonding. When I felt ready emotionally and mentally, only then would we complete that final step. Until that moment arrived, they had to respect my space and boundaries completely. The three of them exchanged meaningful glances. Knox smiled genuinely, the expression reaching his eyes and transforming his face. Rhett nodded respectfully, accepting my terms without argument. Kane stepped closer and extended his hand. He spoke one word that sealed our agreement: deal. Just like that, my entire life took another dramatic turn I never could have predicted. Wedding planning began immediately after my agreement. They wanted something private and small but undeniably elegant. Nobody argued about the details or tried to force their preferences. As the days passed and the wedding date approached, I slowly realized something profound. Maybe these men truly were meant for me, and I had been running from fate itself all along. The next morning when I woke, a note waited on my nightstand. Kane's handwriting was sharp and precise, instructing me that breakfast was downstairs and I shouldn't skip it. My body felt sore from yesterday's stress, and pregnancy symptoms made themselves known. Morning sickness churning my stomach, fatigue weighing down my limbs. I freshened up and made my way downstairs cautiously. The dining room already held all three brothers seated at the table, dressed in expensive suits that screamed power and authority. Knox noticed me first and gestured toward an empty chair with a single word command. I sat down hesitantly, uncomfortable under their collective scrutiny. The table overflowed with breakfast options: fluffy pancakes, scrambled eggs, buttered toast, fresh fruit arranged artistically, orange juice in crystal glasses. But my nervous stomach only allowed me to reach for the juice. Red immediately noticed and stated I needed protein. I insisted I was fine, but my voice lacked conviction. Knox spoke firmly, saying I wasn't fine at all and they had scheduled another doctor's appointment for today to ensure both the pup and I remained healthy throughout this pregnancy. My heartbeat accelerated with anxiety. Another doctor? Everything was progressing too rapidly for my comfort. I protested that I wasn't going to see any doctor today. Kane leaned back in his chair, maintaining that calm but utterly firm demeanor. Yes, I was going, and this wasn't up for negotiation or debate. This marked the first time they had issued a direct order to me, using that undeniable alpha authority that made my omega instincts want to submit. Honestly, their commanding tone infuriated me instead. I told them they couldn't control every aspect of my life. I wasn't some puppet they could manipulate with strings. Rhett's jaw visibly tightened with restrained frustration. Knox carefully set down his fork with deliberate slowness. Kane simply maintained eye contact with those unreadable dark eyes that revealed nothing. He finally spoke, his voice dropping to a lower register. They weren't attempting to control me, they were trying to protect me, and a significant difference existed between those two approaches. I muttered under my breath that it certainly didn't feel different from where I stood. Knox released a heavy sigh and explained their perspective. They understood this situation was completely new territory for me. They recognized I didn't trust them yet, and that was perfectly acceptable for now. However, the pup growing inside me required proper medical attention. I needed proper medical attention, so either I accompanied them willingly to this appointment, or they would physically carry me there. The choice was entirely mine to make. Frustration warred with anger and fear inside my chest, but buried beneath all those turbulent emotions, I knew they were speaking the truth. The pup deserved proper health care regardless of my personal feelings. I stood abruptly from the table and told them fine, I would go to this appointment, but they needed to engrave one crucial fact into their minds. I wasn't their property to command however they pleased. Rhett rose as well, his imposing height towering over my smaller frame. His tone emerged softer than I anticipated when he stated that nobody had ever claimed I was property. He even held the door open when I walked past him toward the entrance. The doctor's clinic occupied a private medical building in an affluent neighborhood. No crowded public waiting rooms filled with curious stares. No whispered gossip behind cupped hands. Dr. Hale, a kind beta woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile, examined me with professional care and sensitivity. She announced with genuine happiness that everything looked excellent. With the pregnancy, the pup was developing healthily and perfectly on schedule. I was approximately 14 weeks along now, she confirmed. 14 weeks translated to nearly 4 months of carrying this life inside me. She angled the ultrasound screen toward where we could all view it clearly, and I saw the image, a tiny flickering heartbeat pulsing with determined life. Tears formed automatically and streamed down my cheeks without my permission. Kane, who stood protectively beside me throughout the examination, gently squeezed my hand in reassurance. Knox and Rhett also watched the screen intently, and for the first time since I had met them, their normally hard expressions completely softened with unmistakable emotion. This represented their pup as well, their genetic legacy, their future bloodline continuing forward. Dr. Hale asked if we wanted to know the gender of the baby. I glanced questioningly at all three alphas, uncertain whose decision this should be. Kane gave a subtle nod of permission. She announced with a smile that we were expecting a boy. Knox's lips curved upward into a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Rhett's eyes softened completely, moisture gathering at the corners for just a moment, and I felt utterly overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. My son, our son, a living person I would soon meet. Dr. Hale continued her assessment, stating he was strong with an excellent heartbeat that indicated good health. However, she expressed serious concern about my current weight and nutritional status, emphasizing that I needed to eat properly and consistently for both my health and the baby's development. She wasn't scolding me, but the worry in her voice was clear and maternal. Returning to the estate after the appointment, Kane summoned me to his private study once we finished lunch. He stated we needed to discuss important matters that couldn't wait any longer. Nervousness immediately flooded my system. Were they planning to force the bonding now? Would they try to make me do something I wasn't emotionally prepared for? He gestured toward a leather chair and told me to sit. I lowered myself carefully into the seat, hyper-aware of every movement. He remained standing behind his massive mahogany desk, his expression deadly serious and contemplative. He used my first name and acknowledged that they fully understood my previous life had been absolute hell. They knew people had hurt me deeply and repeatedly without mercy, but I needed to comprehend something fundamental about their intentions. They weren't anything like those cruel people. They hadn't come here to use me temporarily and then discard me when I was no longer convenient or useful. I remained silent, simply absorbing his words and trying to read the truth behind them. He continued speaking, saying they wanted to bond with me properly and completely, creating that permanent connection between mates. However, this would only happen when I felt genuinely ready emotionally and mentally. Absolutely no force would be applied. No pressure tactics, no manipulation or coercion of any kind. My chest constricted with conflicting feelings pulling me in opposite directions. I asked what would happen if I never reached that point of readiness. Knox's voice suddenly came from the doorway where he must have been standing silently the entire time. He stated plainly that if I never felt ready then they would wait indefinitely without complaint. Rhett walked into the study at that moment and added his perspective. While they could exercise patience regarding the mate bond, the pup absolutely needed to be claimed officially in the eyes of their world, because society would demand legitimacy, and that legitimacy provided crucial legal protections we couldn't ignore. My mind spun, trying to process their words and understand the full implications. I asked them to clarify exactly what they meant by these statements. Kane spoke with careful precision, choosing each word deliberately. They wanted to marry me through legal channels and make it publicly known, thereby making me theirs in every way that mattered to both their dangerous world and the outside society. He paused, letting that monumental declaration sink into my consciousness. My entire world tilted sideways once again. Marriage? This represented an even more massive commitment than anything I had imagined or prepared myself for mentally. Kane observed my shocked expression and nodded confirmation. Yes. Marriage was exactly what they proposed. It would provide legal protection from their numerous enemies. It would shield the pup from anyone who might attempt using him as leverage against them. And most importantly, it would broadcast an unmistakable message to everyone watching. Anyone who dared mess with me would answer directly to the Draven brothers, and that was a death sentence in their world. My emotions tangled together into an incomprehensible knot I couldn't begin to untangle. One path offered safety, security, and protection I desperately needed. The other path whispered warnings about losing control of my own life and becoming trapped forever. Marriage? I barely managed to whisper the word, my voice breaking with disbelief. This represented an exponentially bigger commitment than anything we had discussed previously, and I still barely knew these three men beyond surface interactions. Kane nodded with absolute certainty. Yes, marriage would protect me legally. It would protect our unborn son, and it would transmit a crystal-clear message throughout their underworld. Anyone who messed with me was directly challenging the Dravens. My mind swirled with mixed emotions that pulled me in contradictory directions. Simultaneously, one side recognized the safety this arrangement offered. The other side feared the control and loss of autonomy that might come with permanently binding myself to these dangerous alphas. I asked what would happen if I declined their proposal entirely. Rhett responded with his characteristic bluntness that nothing sugar-coated. Even if I refused marriage, they would still protect me with every resource at their disposal. However, the bond would remain incomplete and vulnerable, and their enemies would perceive that weakness as an exploitable opportunity. Those enemies would specifically target me to inflict pain on the Draven brothers. I asked about these mysterious enemies they kept referencing, confusion and growing fear evident in my trembling voice. Knox stepped forward into the study, his presence filling the space. He explained their reality with brutal honesty. They weren't simply legitimate businessmen running legal operations. Numerous people actively hated them with violent passion. Rival mafia families seeking territory, betrayers who had switched allegiances, corrupt law enforcement officers who wanted them imprisoned or dead. If any of those dangerous enemies discovered I remained unbonded and unmarked, they would immediately come after me specifically to hurt the men who had claimed me. I would transform into a walking target with a bullseye painted on my back and our unborn child's back. My heart plummeted hearing this harsh reality spoken aloud without any comforting filters. I wasn't just considering my own safety anymore. I had to think about the innocent life growing inside my body and what kind of dangerous existence awaited him after birth. I asked how much time they would give me to make this monumental, life-altering decision. Kane's voice noticeably softened around the edges. As much time as I genuinely needed, but he strongly encouraged me to think quickly because keeping me safe represented their absolute top priority above everything else. The following several days passed with surprising peacefulness, considering the heavy decision weighing on my mind. They gave me physical and emotional space without forcing conversations or demanding answers. The mansion's extensive library offered books I read late into the night when anxiety prevented sleep. A beautiful garden provided a sanctuary where I could walk and process my chaotic thoughts. The household staff treated me with genuine respect, and nobody judged me for my unusual circumstances. And the three Alpha brothers remained consistently attentive without becoming suffocating or overwhelming. Kane sought me out daily to talk about seemingly insignificant topics that actually helped me relax. Discussing favorite movies we had both seen, asking about food preferences and childhood comfort meals, questioning me about dreams and ambitions I wanted to accomplish someday when life became stable. Knox regularly invited me on walks around the sprawling estate grounds, and those quiet moments together felt surprisingly calming to my constantly anxious mind and racing thoughts. Rhett remained the most emotionally distant of the three brothers, maintaining careful space between us during most interactions. However, he was simultaneously the most observant, noticing small details the others might miss. When I discovered him in the kitchen late one night carefully preparing chamomile tea without being asked or prompted, I suddenly realized he cared deeply too, just expressing it silently through actions rather than words. Maybe he actually cared the most profoundly of all three, his feelings running so deep that words couldn't adequately express them. One evening while I sat alone in the garden watching the sunset paint brilliant colors across the sky, Knox approached and politely asked permission to sit beside me. I nodded my agreement without speaking. We sat together in comfortable silence for several peaceful minutes, just existing in each other's presence. Knox finally broke the quiet, saying he recognized this entire world scared me terribly, but I possessed far more inner strength than I gave myself credit for having. I admitted with raw honesty that I didn't feel strong whatsoever. I felt like I was actively drowning in deep water, and nobody could reach me to pull me back to safety before I went completely under. He responded gently, his hand coming to rest reassuringly on my shoulder. I wasn't drowning in the slightest. I was learning how to swim in much deeper waters than I had ever navigated before, and they were positioned right there beside me constantly, ready to catch me instantly if I started sinking below the surface. His words somehow healed something fractured and broken inside my damaged heart. Maybe these men weren't as terrible or dangerous to me personally as I had initially feared when they first appeared at my door, but trust required significant time to build, especially after being betrayed and hurt so many times by people who claimed to care. That same night back in my assigned room, someone knocked on my door around midnight. Rhett stood in the hallway looking uncharacteristically uncertain and vulnerable. This marked the first time he had approached me privately without any specific reason or excuse. He asked quietly if he could enter my room. Surprise colored my response when I agreed and stepped aside. He entered with visible awkwardness, hands shoved deep into his pockets defensively. He admitted with difficulty that he wasn't skilled with emotional words or heartfelt conversations, but he wanted me to understand something critically important that he needed to communicate. They were absolutely serious about this situation. About me as a person, about the pup I carried. This wasn't some elaborate game they were playing for entertainment, nor was it a calculated mafia power move to gain advantage. My throat constricted painfully with emotion. I asked him directly why they cared so intensely when they barely knew me beyond one forgotten night. We had shared a single evening together that I couldn't even remember clearly through the alcohol fog. He looked straight into my eyes with startling intensity and complete honesty radiating from his expression. The precise moment they had physically touched me that night in the club, something fundamental changed deep inside all three of them simultaneously. They felt it physically in their bodies, the mate bond beginning to form and take root. Incomplete still, yes. Absolute but undeniably real, powerful and impossible to ignore or deny. My breath stopped completely in my lungs. They had actually felt the bond forming, physically sensed that mystical connection activating. I asked with hurt bleeding through into my voice why they hadn't found me sooner if this bond was genuinely so important and meaningful. He responded quietly, and I could clearly hear guilt layering every word he spoke. They had tried desperately and exhaustively to locate me. I had disappeared completely from their world as if I had never existed. Changed my phone number to something unlisted. Moved to a different apartment across the city without leaving a forwarding address. They had actively searched for 2 solid months before finally discovering my new location. Every single day without exception they looked. Every underground contact they possessed searched. They genuinely thought they had lost me forever and would never find their destined Omega. Was this really the truth? Had they actually expended that much effort trying to find me? My entire perspective suddenly shifted dramatically, and I began to recognize that maybe these men were genuinely different from everyone else who had previously hurt and abandoned me when I became inconvenient. The next day arrived and I made my final decision after hours of careful consideration, weighing every possible factor and consequence. I summoned all 3 brothers to my room for a private conversation that would change everything. My hands trembled slightly with nervousness when I announced I had thought through everything thoroughly and reached a conclusion. I would accept their marriage proposal as they requested. However, I had one absolute condition that was completely non-negotiable under any circumstances. Cain raised a questioning eyebrow, his expression revealing cautious curiosity. I stated my terms with as much firmness as I could summon. Absolutely no forced bonding of any kind. When I felt genuinely ready emotionally, mentally and physically, only then would we complete that final permanent step. Until that specific moment arrived, they had to respect my personal space and clearly defined boundaries completely without exception. The 3 of them exchanged meaningful glances that communicated silently between them. Knox smiled genuinely, the expression reaching his eyes and transforming his normally serious face into something warm and approachable. Rhett nodded with clear respect, accepting my terms without any argument or negotiation. Cain stepped closer and extended his hand toward me formally. He spoke a single word that sealed our binding agreement, deal. Just like that, my entire existence took another dramatic turn I never could have predicted or prepared for. Wedding planning commenced immediately following my acceptance of their proposal. They wanted something intensely private and relatively small but undeniably elegant and memorable. Nobody argued about specific details or attempted forcing their personal preferences over mine. As the days passed quickly and the wedding date approached with increasing speed, I slowly began to realize something profound. Maybe these 3 men truly were meant for me by fate itself, and I had been running scared from destiny all along. They took me shopping for wedding attire and I experienced luxury stores for the first time in my entire life. Knox assisted me in selecting a pristine white suit that fit perfectly. He commented softly that I would look beautiful wearing it. Cain personally chose complimentary shoes and tasteful accessories to complete the ensemble. And Rhett quietly held my hand when I felt overwhelmed by all the attention and expensive options surrounding me in the exclusive boutique. The wedding day finally arrived after what felt like both an eternity and mere seconds. A simple setup had been arranged in the estate's expansive garden, which had been decorated beautifully with fresh flowers everywhere. White roses dominated the color scheme. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Only a handful of people attended. Trusted security guards who had proven their loyalty and family lawyers who handled their legal affairs. No media presence whatsoever. No unnecessary drama or publicity. I wore the simple white suit Knox had helped me choose, and it felt comfortable against my skin while still looking elegant and appropriate. My heart pounded frantically in my chest as I prepared myself mentally for what was about to happen. When I walked down the makeshift aisle created between rows of white chairs, all 3 alphas stood waiting at the front, dressed in matching black suits that made them look even more dangerous and devastatingly handsome, simultaneously intimidating in their combined power. Yet somehow the ceremony proceeded quickly with efficient precision. Legal words were spoken by the officiants. Rings were exchanged that they had specially commissioned. simple silver bands engraved with my initials on the inside. When the officiant announced they could seal the bond if desired, all three of them looked directly at me, silently asking permission and waiting for my consent. I nodded slowly, the movement hesitant but ultimately sure of my choice. Cain approached first with careful reverence. He cradled my face gently between his large hands and pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. Tender and respectful, Knox lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it, his mouth lingering against my skin. The gesture felt deeply reassuring. Rhett simply placed his hand on my shoulder and leaned close to whisper directly into my ear that I was theirs now, completely and forever. A silent promise that I felt resonate deep within my bones. This wasn't the complete claiming bite that would finalize our bond permanently, but it represented a genuine start, a legal commitment that bound us together officially in the eyes of both law and their dangerous society. The reception followed immediately after the ceremony concluded. I finally felt myself beginning to relax as tension slowly drained from my tight muscles. The food had been prepared specifically according to my taste preferences. Music played at a comfortable volume. All three brothers remained attentively nearby, constantly ensuring I felt comfortable and cared for. Knox offered me his hand for a dance, and I had to admit with embarrassment that I had absolutely no idea how to dance properly. He grinned widely and confessed that he didn't know either, but we could pretend together. We swayed together awkwardly to the music, and for the first time in months, I smiled genuinely and felt authentically happy deep in my chest. Cain pulled me aside later into a quiet corner and asked how I was feeling about everything. I answered with complete honesty, overwhelmed by the speed of events, but simultaneously safe for the first time in my entire life. His smile reached his eyes when he responded that my safety was all they truly wanted to provide. That night when I returned to my bedroom, which was now officially our shared room, someone knocked gently. Rhett stood outside looking contemplative. He asked if I was having trouble sleeping. I shook my head and explained that too many thoughts were racing through my mind. Everything had happened so incredibly fast. He stepped inside carefully and admitted he felt the same restlessness. He spoke my name softly and said he recognized he wasn't easy to understand or read emotionally. But he genuinely cared about me more than I probably realized, more than he had ever cared about anyone in his entire existence. My heart squeezed painfully with emotion. I told him I was starting to see that truth clearly. All three of them were different from anyone I had ever known. We sat together in comfortable silence that somehow felt intimate despite the lack of conversation. The next morning brought an unexpected challenge when news of our marriage somehow leaked to the media. Headlines appeared everywhere across news sites and social media. Mafia alphas marry pregnant Omega. Public reaction split dramatically. Some people expressed support and happiness for us. Others judged harshly and cruelly, posting vicious comments online. But the Dravens shielded me completely from the worst of it. They issued an official statement through their legal team that was direct and threatening. Charlie Draven was their bonded mate, and anyone who disrespected me would answer to them directly and personally. Surprisingly, the hatred and cruel comments diminished rapidly after that statement, because who would be foolish enough to challenge the Dravens openly? Months passed with remarkable smoothness. My baby bump became visibly prominent and I felt increasingly comfortable in this new life. Doctor visits happened regularly, and our son continued growing healthy and strong. The bond between us strengthened naturally without any force or pressure. I spent late nights watching movies with Cain, my head resting comfortably on his broad chest. I experimented with cooking recipes in the kitchen alongside Knox, laughing when we created disasters. I passed quiet evenings in the library with Rhett, both of us reading separate books but existing together peacefully. These men weren't perfect by any definition. They were dangerous criminals, possessive to an extreme degree, but they were genuinely mine and I was theirs. When labor finally began in my 9th month, terror gripped me completely. All three of them accompanied me to the private hospital, visibly tense but offering unwavering support. Hours passed. Painful, exhausting, endless hours. But when I finally heard my pup's first cry echoing through the delivery room, everything felt worthwhile. The nurse announced with a warm smile that we had a healthy boy. Pride and raw love transformed all three alphas' faces, showing emotion they had never displayed before. I held my baby carefully, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably. He was absolutely perfect. tiny and innocent. Ours completely. Kane touched my face gently and told me I had been amazing and so strong. Knox kissed my forehead and whispered about our son and our family. Rhett simply stared at the baby with soft, wet eyes, quietly thanking me. I asked what we should name him while looking at all three fathers. They exchanged glances before Kane spoke gently, saying I should decide since I had carried him. I smiled through exhaustion and happiness, announcing I wanted to name him Scott. Scott Draven. Knox whispered that it was perfect, emotion thick in his voice. Rhett nodded and gently touched Scott's tiny hand with reverence. In that profound moment, everything finally made complete sense. This journey hadn't been easy, it had been painful and traumatic, but it had been entirely worth every difficult moment. Because I wasn't alone anymore. I was loved deeply, protected fiercely, claimed completely, and I had finally found my real home with my alphas and our son. Forever.